Hello everyone, and welcome back to Module 10 of General Psychology. In our last lecture, we explored some of the most influential and sometimes controversial figures in personality psychology, Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. Pioneers who tried to peer into the unconscious mind to figure out what makes us, us. Today, we shift gears into modern territory. We're going to explore how psychologists today try to make sense of human personality, not just with historic theories or intuitive guesses, but with empirical models and scientific frameworks. We'll ease into this idea by exploring the ubiquity of modern personality tests. From BuzzFeed quizzes to the Myers-Briggs, we love labeling ourselves. Why is that? And what do those labels really tell us? But one of the biggest developments in modern psychology is a shift away from categorical models, which try to sort people into rigid types, and towards dimensional models that see personality as existing along spectrums. These approaches aren't just more flexible, they're more scientifically grounded and better at predicting how we think, feel, and behave in the real world. But before we get into all that, let's quickly review what we covered in Lecture 10.1. Freud believed that internal conflict between which three components of the psyche shaped our personality. Is it A, the id, ego, and superego? B, the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious? C, archetypes, complexes, and persona? Or D, id, archetype, and libido? If you chose A, the id, ego, and superego, you've got it. Freud's three-part model is how he thought of the underlying mental processes that contributed to our entire personality. Let's do another one. Which of the following best describes Jung's idea of the collective unconscious? A, a personal storage of repressed childhood memories. B, a universal psychological structure shared by all humans. C, a form of classical conditioning. Or D, a dreamlike state caused by emotional stress. The answer here is B. The collective unconscious, according to Jung, is a universal and somewhat mystical perspective on how all humans share an element of their psychological structure. In today's lecture, we're exploring how modern psychology makes sense of personality. We'll start by looking at why personality tests are so appealing. Then we'll dive into the popular but controversial Myers-Briggs type indicator as a case study in categorical thinking. From there, we'll shift to dimensional models, which offer more flexible, scientifically grounded approaches. Finally, we'll wrap it up with the Big Five, one of the current leading models in personality research, before getting to our conclusion and review. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of personality models, let's take a moment to explore why we're so drawn to understanding our personality through tests in the first place. From serious assessments to silly quizzes, personality tests give us a sense of clarity in a world that's often pretty complicated. But as we'll see, not all tests are created equal. Back in the 2010s, BuzzFeed quizzes were the go-to way to procrastinate and explore your personality. I can definitely remember some late nights avoiding work in college, answering questions from quizzes with titles like, "Which potato dish are you based on your zodiac sign?" Sure, those quizzes were ridiculous, but the desire behind them wasn't, and the spirit of them lives on in modern social media platforms. Have you ever stopped to wonder why we're so obsessed with these tests? Why do we love putting labels on ourselves, even when we know that this line of questioning is probably not all that scientific? Let's dig into the psychology behind our fascination with personality tests. So why are we drawn to personality tests like moths to a flame? First, there's the appeal of self-discovery. These tests make us feel like we're uncovering hidden truths about ourselves. They give us a language to describe parts of our identity that we might not have fully understood before. Then there's the comfort of labels. Humans love to categorize things. It makes the world feel predictable and less chaotic. When a test labels you as an introvert or a visionary, it feels like you've been given a roadmap for understanding yourself. Personality tests also give us the illusion of control. They take the messy, complicated reality of who we are and simplify it into neat, digestible results. It feels empowering, even if it's not 100% accurate. And finally, there's the shared experience. When you find out someone shares your personality type, it can create a quick connection. It's a way of building community and feeling like you belong. These tests feed into how we respond to vague general statements about who we are through a psychological process initially known as the Forer effect, but perhaps better known as the Barnum effect. The Barnum effect is the tendency to believe that vague general statements about personality apply specifically to you. It's named after P.T. Barnum, the showman behind the circus who famously said, "There's a sucker born every minute." Let me give you an example. You have a great need for others to like and admire you, but you also tend to be critical of yourself. Or how about, you have a lot of potential, but you sometimes feel like people don't recognize it. These sound resonant? That's because these statements are designed to feel universal. They're broad enough that almost anyone can relate to them in some way. So why does this work? It's because we naturally focus on the parts that resonate with us, and we ignore the parts that don't. We're wired to find patterns and meaning, even when the information is vague or generic, perhaps especially so. This is one reason why personality tests, especially the ones you find online, can feel eerily accurate, even if they're not based on solid science. Now, we've talked about why personality tests are so appealing: clarity, identity, validation, connection. But these tests also often reflect a particular theoretical orientation when it comes to how we think about personality. This perspective doesn't see personality traits as flexible or evolving. Instead, they try to sort people into types, fixed categories, one label or another. This is called a categorical model, and one of the most famous examples is the Myers-Briggs. We'll use this familiar test as a launching pad. We'll take a look at where it comes from, why it's so popular, and how it fits into the broader scientific conversation, especially when we start comparing it to dimensional models, which we'll explore shortly. So let's talk about the most famous and most debated personality test out there, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. If you've ever been told you're an INTJ or an ENFP or maybe an ISFJ, you've probably taken the Myers-Briggs, or MBTI. It's everywhere. It's in schools, workplaces, even dating apps. But here's the big question. Is it actually scientific? Well, let's break down where the Myers-Briggs comes from, why it's so popular, and what psychologists really think about it. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI, was developed by Catherine Briggs and her daughter Isabel Myers back in the 1940s. They were inspired by Carl Jung's theories about psychological types, like introversion and extroversion, but they took it a step further. The MBTI sorts people into 16 distinct personality types based on 4 dichotomies. Introversion, or I, versus extroversion, E. Do you get your energy from alone time or from being around people? Sensing, S, versus intuition, N. Do you prefer concrete facts and details, or do you focus on big picture ideas and possibilities? Thinking, T, versus feeling, F. Do you make decisions based on logic and objective facts, or do you prioritize emotions and the impact on people? And finally, there's judging, J, versus perceiving, P. Are you more structured and organized, or do you prefer to be flexible and go with the flow? By combining these preferences, you get a 4-letter type, like INTJ, also known as the architect, or ENFP, also known as the champion. It's simple, relatable, and let's be honest, it's kind of fun to see where you land. So why is the Myers-Briggs so popular? First, it's relatable. The descriptions are clear, easy to understand, and they feel personal. Who doesn't like being told that they're the mediator or the commander? It also creates a strong sense of identity. Getting labeled as an INFJ or ESTP feels both unique enough and affirming. It gives us a simple way to explain our complex personalities. The MBTI is also widely used in the workplace. Companies use it for team building, hiring decisions, and leadership development. It's seen as a way to improve communication and understand how different people operate in a team. And finally, it feels scientific. The structured format, the 4-letter codes, it all gives the impression that the Myers-Briggs is based on solid research. But as we're about to see, it doesn't hold up very well under scientific scrutiny. So what are some of the critiques of the Myers-Briggs? While it's popular and widely known, it's far from perfect. The biggest issue is its lack of scientific validity. The MBTI doesn't consistently predict how people will behave in different situations, and there's little evidence that these 16 types accurately represent the complexity of personality. The MBTI also has poor reliability. Studies have shown that people often get different results when they retake the test, even after just a few weeks. If your personality type keeps changing, how reliable is the test really? Another problem is oversimplification. The MBTI forces people into rigid categories, but personality isn't black and white. For example, very few people are purely introverted or extroverted. Most of us fall somewhere in between, and it depends on the situation. Finally, the MBTI is based on outdated theories. It draws heavily from Jung's ideas about psychological types, but modern psychology has moved beyond these early models in favor of more empirically grounded approaches. So while the MBTI can be fun and even useful in certain settings, it's not the most reliable tool for understanding personality in a scientific way. Let's take a moment to reflect. Have you ever taken a test to discover your Myers-Briggs type? Did you find the results accurate or helpful? Why do you think the MBTI is still so popular, even though it's not the most scientifically sound test out there. Whether you love the Myers-Briggs or see it as just another pop psychology tool, it's a great reminder that not all personality tests are created equal. Just because a model like the Myers-Briggs isn't scientifically rigorous doesn't mean that it's totally useless. This is where we return to our guiding quote from the statistician George Box: "All models are wrong, but some are useful." Personality tests, even flawed ones, can offer language, reflection, and insight. They can spark self-awareness. But they're not truth with a capital T. So the real question becomes, which models are most useful, not just for labeling ourselves, but for understanding how humans behave? That's where dimensional models come in, and why they've become central to modern psychological science. Instead of forcing people into rigid categories, psychologists now focus on dimensional models that see personality as existing along a spectrum. This approach gives us a much more nuanced and scientifically valid understanding of what makes us who we are. Let's break down the key differences between categorical and dimensional models of personality. Categorical models, like the Myers-Briggs, sort people into rigid categories. You're either an introvert or an extrovert, with no middle ground. This kind of model is simple, easy to understand, and feels intuitive, but it often oversimplifies the complexity of who we are. Dimensional models, on the other hand, view personality traits as existing along a spectrum. Instead of forcing you into one box or another, they recognize that people can have varying degrees of different traits. Maybe you're 60% introverted and 40% extroverted, and that balance can shift depending on the situation. So why does this matter? It matters because dimensional models are more flexible, more accurate, and better at predicting real-world behavior. They reflect that personality is complex and dynamic, not something that can be fully captured by a single label. Let's use introversion and extroversion as an example. In a categorical model like the MBTI, you're forced to choose. Are you an introvert or an extrovert? But most people aren't purely one or the other. Dimensional models recognize that introversion and extroversion exist on a spectrum. Imagine a slider that goes from 100% introverted to 100% extroverted. You might land somewhere in the middle, or even move back and forth depending on the situation. For example, you might be more introverted in large social gatherings, but feel extroverted when you're with close friends. This flexibility reflects how people really behave in the world. In fact, many people fall right in the middle of this spectrum. These folks are often called ambiverts. They can exhibit traits of both introversion and extroversion, depending on the situation. So why are dimensional models considered more scientific? First, they offer more flexibility and complexity. People aren't static. They change over time and in different situations. Dimensional models capture this nuance by recognizing that traits exist on a spectrum. They also have better predictive power. Because dimensional models don't rely on oversimplified categories, they're better at predicting real-world behavior. This makes them more accurate and useful in practical settings. Dimensional models are backed by strong empirical support. They're the result of decades of research, statistical analysis, and peer-reviewed studies. Unlike many popular personality tests, they hold up under scientific scrutiny. Finally, dimensional models are widely used in clinical and research settings. They're used to diagnose mental health conditions, design treatment plans, and conduct psychological research. Their flexibility and accuracy makes them invaluable tools in modern psychology. Let's do another attention check. What is the key difference between categorical and dimensional models of personality? A. Categorical models use spectrums, while dimensional models use fixed types. B. Categorical models place people in distinct groups, while dimensional models see traits as spectrums. C. Dimensional models are outdated, while categorical models are modern. Or D. There is no difference. If you picked B, you're right. Categorical models force people into distinct groups, while dimensional models recognize that personality traits can exist on a spectrum. All right, we've explored how personality tests have evolved from rigid categories to more flexible dimensional models. But what's the leading dimensional model in modern psychology when it comes to understanding personality? That would be the Big Five personality traits, also known as the five-factor model. This model is the result of decades of research, and it's backed by strong scientific evidence. It doesn't try to force people into boxes, but instead looks at personality traits as existing along several spectrums. Let's break down what the Big Five are, how they work, and why they become such a widely accepted model in psychology. The Big Five personality traits, often remembered by the acronym OCEAN, include openness to experience. This measures your level of creativity, curiosity, and willingness to try new things. Are you open to new ideas, or do you prefer sticking to what you know? Conscientiousness. This is all about how organized, responsible, and dependable you are. Are you detail-oriented and goal-driven, or do you prefer to go with the flow? Extroversion. This measures how sociable, assertive, and energetic you are in social situations. Do you thrive in crowds, or do you prefer quiet solo time? Agreeableness. This reflects how compassionate, cooperative, and trusting you are. Are you warm and empathetic, or more skeptical and competitive? And finally, there's neuroticism. This measures your tendency towards emotional instability, anxiety, and moodiness. Do you stay calm under pressure, or do you experience frequent emotional ups and downs? The beauty of the Big Five is that it's scientifically validated and nearly universally applicable. These traits show up across different cultures, and they're measured on spectrums, meaning there's no right or wrong personality type. It's about understanding where you land on each trait. This dimensional framework is the real strength of the Big Five model. Instead of putting you into a fixed box, it sees personality as a blend of different traits that exist along spectrums. For example, you might be high in openness to experience, meaning you love trying new things, but low in conscientiousness, so maybe you're not the most organized person. Or you might be low in extroversion, but high in agreeableness, making you a quiet but deeply compassionate person. And here's the thing, these traits aren't set in stone. While we often have a baseline in how we approach situations in each of these domains, that approach can shift depending on your environment, experiences, and even your mood. Maybe you're more extroverted at work because your job demands it, but you prefer quiet, reflective time when you're at home. This flexibility and nuance are what makes the Big Five such a powerful tool for understanding personality. This also makes it a powerful tool for personal growth. Knowing where you fall on the Big Five can help you identify your strengths and areas for development, making it easier to navigate relationships, work, and life in general. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the allure of personality tests to the scientific frameworks that give us deeper understandings of what makes us who we are. We started with those fun but sometimes questionable online quizzes that give us neat little labels and make us feel seen, even if they don't always hold up to scientific scrutiny. We discussed how these approaches to understanding personality are categorical, and we dove deep into one of the most well-known categorical approaches to understanding personality, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. Then we explored the shift from categorical models, which box us into fixed types, to dimensional models, which recognize that personality traits exist on spectrums and are much more flexible and nuanced. And finally, we dove into the Big Five personality traits, a leading model in modern personality psychology. Unlike the other models, the Big Five is backed by decades of research and offers comprehensive, scientifically validated ways to understand personality. Before we wrap up, let's do a bit of review to see how much stuck with you. What term describes the tendency to believe vague personality descriptions apply specifically to you? Is it A, the halo effect, B, the Dunning-Kruger effect, C, the Barnum effect, or D, the placebo effect? The correct answer is C. The Barnum effect explains why the most generic personality descriptions can feel like they're uniquely about you. Which of the following personality models is backed by the most scientific research? Is it A, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI, B, the Big Five personality traits, C, the Rorschach Inkblot test, or D, the Thematic Apperception test, or TAT? If you picked B, you're spot on. The Big Five is one of the most scientifically validated personality models that we currently have. Personality isn't just about fitting into boxes or memorizing traits. It's about understanding the dynamic, ever-evolving nature of who we are. While models like the Myers-Briggs give us easy labels, it's the dimensional approaches like the Big Five that truly capture the depth and complexity of human behavior. So as you navigate the world, whether you're taking a silly quiz online or exploring more serious psychological models, remember that personality is fluid. It shifts with experience, grows over time, and can't be fully captured by any one test. Thanks for sticking with me today, and as always, stay curious, stay resilient, and above all, live life in flux. I'll see you in the next lecture.